Welcome back to Africa Day of Transport and Climate Change Week. We hope you made good use of this first networking break this morning, and we invite you to stay connected and exchange on your ideas further on the day. Now, we're looking forward to the next interactive workshop on electric mobility, unlocking the electric mobility value chain in Africa, with great experts and innovative companies sharing on their business models and experiences on the ground. And with this, I hand over to Herman Kwoba. Herman, who is moderating the session for us. Herman, the floor is yours. Herman, can you hear us?
Thank you very much. Stephanie. So I think there is a small delay in audio, but I hope everyone can hear me quite well. Very much looking forward to today's session. But first of all, to introduce myself, my name is Herman Kwoba. I work with GIZ in Nairobi, Kenya, based in Nairobi, within the transport portfolio. So, and part of our work also it's broadly covering sustainable mobility issues, but also specifically looking at how to advance the electric mobility agenda within the region. With regards to today's session, so the main topic is unlocking the electric mobility value chain in the continent. And I just thought, what do we mean by value chain? Specifically here, we're looking at the manufacturing aspect and all other processes that lead to a finished product, including the use as well as disposal of the products. And also looking at exactly what opportunities arise from these different processes, both in manufacturing as well as in the use and disposal. As far as speakers are concerned, we have quite an very specialized and expensive array of speakers. So we have speakers from McKinsey and Company. So this is in order of speaking. I will not introduce the speakers right now, but I will give them the opportunity to do that when they speak. So we have speakers from McKinsey and Company, Way to Kenya, Cargo Bikes Africa, and Border Work Uganda. So quite a wide array of speakers covering pretty much the entire continent. So we're really looking forward to the discussions here. And speaking will cover an overview of the market, design elements based on user needs, business models for electric motorcycles, as well as a special focus on batteries. And now a little bit of housekeeping. I think the tech team can put up the slide on housekeeping. And primarily here, the main thing I would like to point out is that for those of us who are joining on the Teams channel, please make sure that you are muted unless you're speaking, so as to reduce the background noise. If possible, please, for speakers, switch on your cameras when speaking, primarily for the discussion or interactive session. Further to that, please introduce yourself in the chat. We would really be interested to know who's joining us, both for those who are joining us online and as well as those who are joining us. Those joining us via the platform and those joining us on the Teams. Please, we're really interested to know which countries are joining us today. This will facilitate the discussion session. And during the interactive session, please raise your hand and use the chat to post any questions and comments as they arise. For those who might need translation, especially French speakers, the session will be run primarily in English with French translation available only on this Plus platform. So if you need translation, please join the online platform. The MS team will not have this function. The tech team will shortly share the link to this for those who are in the Teams room. We also highly encourage you to participate actively. Look forward to a very interactive discussion. And right now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand it over already to Gilian. She will introduce herself as well as the topic she's covering. We're really looking forward to your session, Gilian. Welcome, and over to you. 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Herman, and pleasure to be with all of you today. My name is Gilian Pais. I'm a partner with McKinsey and Company based out of our Nairobi office and a member of our global sustainability practice. And happy to share with you today the findings of some work we did over the past few months on the future of e-mobility on the continent. And so if I can just ask for our presentation to be pulled up, I'm going to do sort of a 10-minute overview here to set the stage for this conversation. I'm going to talk a bit about what the global view on e-mobility is, and then talk specifically about the Africa landscape. This work, if we go to the next page, this work was done fairly recently, and it was done in collaboration with many actors on the ground in Africa, including many of the players that are here on the call. We've definitely talked to players on the ground who are actually working in e-mobility in Africa, investors, government actors. We also surveyed consumers in Africa in terms of how they think about vehicle purchasing. We ran a pilot with over 40 motorcycle drivers on electric bikes in Kenya. And then lastly, looked at what is happening in other emerging markets around the world, Asia in particular, in terms of e-mobility adoption. All the findings I'm going to share with you are publicly available. I will provide a link to the report at the end of this presentation if you would like more information. So let me go to the next page and talk a bit about the global landscape. So just for context, globally, we expect 80% of all vehicle sales in the world to be electric by 2050. And what you see on the left here, these curves, are actually what we call adoption curves, which is the percent of sales of vehicles in different segments that will actually go electric. And then what you've got on the right is then the percent of the park, which is the stock of vehicles on the road that will be electric over the same time frame. So as I mentioned, 80% of all vehicle sales we expect globally to be electric by 2050. In fact, in the three largest vehicle markets in the world, China, the United States, and Europe, we expect virtually all sales of vehicles to be electric by 2035. And this is being driven not only by technology availability and consumer push for cleaner transport, but also government regulation, to the point that many OEMs in the world have committed actually to completely phase out production of internal combustion engine vehicles in certain timeframes. And all this is important context for us because in Africa, we've got a really interesting situation. So if I go to the next page, one of the major things we really need to think about as a continent as we transition towards cleaner mobility is the fact that, as many people know, we actually have a lot of used vehicles on the road in Africa. In fact, 40% of all light-duty vehicles exported globally end up in Africa. And many of our countries, we say 41 out of 54 here, actually have what are considered weak or very weak regulations when it comes to used vehicles. So why does this matter? It does matter because as you see the rest of the world transitioning to an electric mobility transition, and as you see OEMs phasing out ICE vehicles, what we don't want to happen is for Africa to be a dumping ground for old ICE vehicles, and we actually end up with unclean transport while the rest of the world has clean transport. So we need to work through our situation differently. So if we go to the next page, I'm going to start talking a bit about then how do we think about Africa in this context. So first things first, some facts. Our vehicle park, which is a stock of vehicle on the road, is growing significantly in 5 countries that we looked at in depth, which are Kenya, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Nigeria. We said that the vehicle park today is about 14 million vehicles, growing to about 43 million vehicles by 2040. If you add South Africa into that number, which is the largest vehicle park in Africa, that's 22 to about 58 million. 50% of that park is two-wheelers, which is very important for our future discussion here. The second thing to realize is that we do have relatively low vehicle ownership compared to the rest of the world. You'll see some benchmarks here. Ownership for And that does mean that ownership for vehicles tends to be in slightly higher income segments. That's very important when we think about charging, right? It does mean that on average, people who do own a vehicle will have access to a parking space and electricity in most of our countries. So we don't necessarily have very large vehicles owned in lower income segments. So that helps a little bit when we think about the charging question as we go forward. The third thing I've mentioned, of course, is that we have a huge used car dynamic, which comes into play when we think about e-mobility adoption. I'll talk about that in a bit. In fact, majority of all passenger cars and LCVs, which are light commercial vehicles, less than 3-ton commercial transport vehicles, are purchase used in most African countries, 80% purchase used. And some countries allow up to 15-year-old cars when they're purchased. Only two-wheelers are dominantly sold new on the continent. And again, this will come into play as we think about e-mobility. Often we talk about road infrastructure. People are really worried about, if we sit in traffic with a lot of congestion, will an electric vehicle even work, right? Will we run out of battery? But I would say this is not atypical. This is true in many other emerging markets. In fact, electric vehicles perform better in start-stop conditions from an efficiency point of view than ICE vehicles. So in our view, this is not a constraint. However, one of the things to realize is that many vehicles in Africa do go up to 200,000 kilometers over their life cycle, and we don't yet have a lot of proof points on how long batteries will actually last. The Nissan Leaf and the Tesla have gone about 200,000, 300,000 kilometers on the road with 80% battery capacity still left. So we still do believe technically that there is a very clear technical adoption case in Africa. And lastly, we've got a question on our electricity mix. Of course, in East Africa, we have a very renewable electricity mix. Many other countries still rely a lot on thermal. That, of course, then plays a role in terms of how clean electric vehicles actually are relative to ICE vehicles. But I will say, even in an unclean energy mix with dominance of thermal, actually an electric vehicle is more sustainable compared to an ICE vehicle because it net consumes less fuel. So I'd say even in countries that have high thermal energy, we do see that an electric vehicle is better than an ICE vehicle. So those are some unique conditions. Now let's actually get into what that means for electric mobility adoption. So if we go to the next page, just to give you a sense of how we did our work here. So we looked at all vehicle classes in Africa. We looked at two-wheelers, passenger cars, light commercial vehicles, and even some of the larger vehicle classes, which I won't talk about today, stay more in the light duty vehicle side. We looked at what are the economics for adoption, which is essentially, if you look at a lifetime of a vehicle, what is the economic case in Africa to actually use an electric vehicle versus an ICE vehicle? We then look at things like behavioral factors and affordability factors. Do people have access to electricity to charge? Is that electricity reliable? Do they have access to a parking space? Can this vehicle class be charged easily, like a motorcycle, which you can actually switch out the battery relatively quickly? Or do you need fast charging infrastructure overnight, which is true for some very high traffic vehicles, or fast charging infrastructure en route? And that helped us define some adoption curves. Then we looked at individual country factors. We really focused on the 5 countries you see here. We looked at things such as electricity price, electricity reliability, government regulations, etc. And then finally, this resulted in adoption curves for electric vehicles on the different segments in Africa, which I'm going to show you in a bit. Before I do, I'll show you one example, right? Here's an example of what let's go to that page, what the economics look like. So this is a comparison of a electric motorcycle, which you'll see on the right, compared to a ICE motorcycle, internal combustion engine motorcycle, locally assembled in Kenya. And this is a lifetime comparison, total cost of ownership over 5 years. And you will see, despite the fact that the upfront price for the motorcycle, and this was done about 6 months ago, actually the EV price, I understand, has come down even more. But even at the time, you've got about $500 difference on the upfront price. But you'll actually see that over the course of the lifetime, 5 years, the electric motorbike is significantly cheaper, largely due to the significantly lower operating costs. And this is even in Kenya, which has a relatively high electricity price. You do see much lower fuel price, quote unquote, for the electric vehicle because of charging, and then even lower maintenance because a electric vehicle has far fewer moving parts than an ICE vehicle. In general, it's a different motor setup, and so the maintenance cost is actually much lower. And even if we then assume you can't resell at the end of life an electric motorbike, we assume there is no residual value, that it's done at that point. Net, you actually do see a significant savings. And we actually tested these numbers out in the field to actually test the operating cost of these bikes. And so these are validated in real life, they aren't theoretical. And so there is a strong case for adoption when you look at a lifetime perspective for all electric vehicle classes. But that being said, let me jump into then the killer page here. And this is showing you what the vehicle adoption rates would look like in Africa in the 5 countries that I mentioned. And what you've got on the left here is what we'd say is a base case. The base case would be the market operates as the market operates case where private sector really drives. And really it's left up to individual consumers' behavior, purchasing decisions, as well as the net availability of electric vehicles to drive adoption, right? And you'll see basically on the left, our projection is by 2040, about 50% of all two-wheeler sales will be electric. And then you get to about 15 to 20% of other vehicle classes, and I'll talk about why. And then in the middle, we've got this accelerated case. And here's the case where we say government actually starts playing a more interventionist role, actually incentivizes, proactively builds charging infrastructure, maybe even sets targets. And here you get, up to nearly 70% on the two-wheeler adoption, and then a significantly higher bump on the larger vehicle segments. And then on the far right, I've got that translated into numbers of vehicles sold. I'll spend a little bit, and this is probably the last page I'll really cover here, in terms of why, actually, can we go back to that one? I'm sorry. This is why you see some of these differences. So our view is two-wheelers will be the fastest to adopt. Why? Two-wheelers are primarily purchased new. They're bought every 2 to 5 years. Actually, they have a quick turnaround time, relatively easy to charge. Actually, you can swap out the battery. You can charge at home pretty easily. You can charge on the street pretty easily. It's a relatively small battery, doesn't need a lot of charging. And as I saw, the economics work out really well. And over time, we've seen the cost coming down for these. And so then when you have a rapidly turnover fleet and you've got this, relatively easy to charge approach and then good cost competitiveness, actually the adoption rates should be faster. But then when we look at the larger vehicle segments, the challenge is this used vehicle dynamic. And that's why we see slower adoption curves without government intervention. Because when you have used vehicles, you're of course paying significantly less upfront for that vehicle than you would if you were to purchase a new vehicle. And right now we don't have used EVs on the market at any form of scale. So EVs upfront purchase price will not be competitive with a used ICE vehicle in Africa for at least 15 to 20 years. And unless there's regulation forcing adoption or actually restricting used vehicles on the road, we actually don't think the adoption rates for large vehicles, which are predominantly purchased used, will actually pick up until the mid-2030s. And that's why some of these larger vehicle segments, you see lower adoption rates. We do expect slightly faster adoption rates in things like commercial vehicles, just because corporates might desire to make sustainability commitments faster, but the average consumer will still, of course, index primarily for affordability. And we do also have issues around charging infrastructure that may make people somewhat reticent to adopt. So the important takeaway here is two-wheelers, which many of the players here will talk about shortly, really the fastest case of adoption in Africa. Some of these larger vehicle segments may require some government intervention if they are to become more cost competitive before the 2030s when used EVs start becoming available. And that actually consumer behavior and consumer change is very important to influence, especially when we think about things like charging anxiety or range anxiety for some of the larger vehicles.
Okay.
So that's the last thing I'll say. Final page is just a link to the reports that you can access if you'd like, that actually give you more information on these two things. But I will hand back to Herman. I hope that was a helpful setting the stage conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gillian. This was very, very helpful. I think a really great overview of how the market is at the moment and also how we see the market growing in the future. I will actually be coming to you much later. I want to help you stay in the call because I'm quite interested in what factors you took into consideration in the accelerated case. So maybe some insights here as well might be relevant. But I also assume there's some questions from the participants who are joining us online already. We see participation from Namibia, Uganda, and other countries all over. So Also, just to encourage participants, please let us know which region or country you're joining us from. Really good for those insights as well. And now we'd like to shift over to somewhere in Western Kenya, my very good friend Omondi, to give us a bit of insights on what they've been doing with Wetu around electric motorcycle adoption and what issues around business models they took into consideration in getting people to, or riders to take up these motorcycles. So over to you, Omondi. Looking forward to a very interesting session. Strictly 10 minutes. Thank you.
I'll try, Herman. Hello, everybody. My name is Omondi Ooko. I work in Western Kenya. Right now I'm in a place called Homa Bay. And I work for a company called Wetu. Officially, we have Victoria Limited. As a progress manager, I do a lot with different projects, doing business development. And maybe if we could have my slides up. Yep. The next slide, please. All right, so basically at Wetu, let me tell you very briefly about our company, then you go directly to the project you are doing. We essentially have three verticals, the business verticals: We Mobility, We Power, and We Water. And all of them work sort of in tandem. Generally, we use power to power different energy to power different innovations. So we do have fishing lanterns that are lithium-ion based and charge them at our hubs. We do water filtration and sell it back to the community at very subsidized rates. And also now we've gotten into e-mobility, and then also a more couple of projects under the business development sector that have not really been operationalized. So right now they're still under project phase. Next slide. Yes, so that is where we are. We have right now a total of 15 stations. All of them are very strategically located around the beautiful Lake Victoria. And this is because this is where our target clients are. We work a lot with fishermen, we work a lot with motorcycle riders. Locally, we call them boda boda. So that is our target location. All our stations are solar powered. You'll see in the next slide, we have a capacity of about 165. We actually recently upgraded one of the stations to 30 kilowatt peak from 15 kilowatt peak, and you're putting up two stations of 36 kilowatt peak each. So we'll go to probably 250 kilowatt peak soon. So the basic idea was we have lots of solar generated energy, and right now we're using them to power different innovations, but there was excess power. So we decided to bring in e-mobility, so they're able to fully utilize the power that you have. So we've been looking at different solutions that can be tailored for the local environment. There are a couple of challenges here, including access roads, the challenges with the first and last mile connectivity. So we've been looking for partners again that we can actually work with long term to localize these solutions, iterate them, and make them ideal for the community. So right now we are piloting in a place called Mbita and Homa Bay, where I am right now. Next slide, please. All right, so just to very quickly talk about our approach. It was basically three phases. If you have to summarize like that. So we work with, we identify an innovation, and then we try to get the technical proof of concept. So basically we look at the bike performance, we look at the energy consumption, and this was in a controlled environment. So our own staff members would work with these innovations and with these bikes and test them under different protocols, testing speed, testing load carried, testing different terrains, testing different gradients, so they can understand better how the bikes would actually perform and how the batteries also actually perform. Then the next phase would be user engagement, and you do pilot trials with actual users. So you identify the commercial bike riders, give them the bikes, have them go and operate with them as they normally would operate an ICE bike. And then every evening they give us feedback on how the bike performed, on how the batteries performed and all that. And over time, we're collecting this data so that we're able to better understand battery needs, the wear and tear of the bikes, also understand the rider habits, if you're creating any new pain points. And also gradually working with these pilot riders, you want to know if they are willing and also capable of paying. and also drafting a couple of user personas to help us to properly identify who our actual target would be. And then when you go to the next phase of business proof of concept, we eventually identified a couple of different user personas, and we did different price offer trials for the different groups and just see how this works out, and also doing a couple of iterations on these pricing models. And then also, because for EVs right now, there's really no study, as the previous presenter said, we do not know how the batteries would last, for instance. So it's not easy to scientifically define and try to estimate an ROI. So we benchmarked with the existing business models. There are a couple of those locally, which I'll share shortly, and also then try to iterate from that point. And we did this with the support of a couple of partners, JZ, Partners for Green Growth, and Siemens Tiftan. And as well, during that period, we're trying to build more or less like an ecosystem of EVs in the local community. So we did a training needs analysis, trying to understand what are the skills gap we have in the market. Are the local mechanics able to service an EV? We tried to understand the potential economic and social impact of EVs in the community. We also did an environmental impact study as well. The next slide. Yeah, so what are some of the lessons that we learned? And I might go back and forth through the different columns. So one, the average kilometer for a 2.1 kilowatt battery is 33.3 kilometers. This is what the riders normally use. And we know we had to do this because normally the manufacturer's information on the product manual is lab tested or factory tested, so does not take into account most of the terrain issues, the rider habits issue and things like that. So we had to actually do that. And we realized that energy consumption is affected heavily by terrain load. If the riders do a circular or linear movement patterns, the riding speed and the rider habits. For instance, if somebody is prone to always accelerate instead of gradually gaining speed, the energy consumption will be way, way much higher. And we also realized that users need between 1 and 2.5 batteries per day. And this is very different because of the different kind of user personas that we came up with. And also realized that a 10 amp DC charger can charge up to 2 batteries per day because you must have a significantly long resting period immediately after use when the battery has been used, and immediately after the charging. You don't put in a bike again immediately, otherwise there might be chaos. And for user engagement, we had 3 commercial riders, which I said we call them border, distributors, and corporate. In the rural area, there are not so many opportunities to work with corporates because most of the head offices are based in Nairobi, Kisumu, and such other towns. But and as well, the income level here is not as high as the other towns. So not many corporates here have that opportunity for hail apps and things like that. So it doesn't work here so much. So
sorry, just to alert you, you have about maximum 3 minutes.
Right. So we realize that the commercial rider movements are not really predetermined. When they go to their normal stop station, they can go anywhere that the client wants them to go. So it's a bit tricky planning with that again. And also realize that some new set pain points have been created by EVs. The issues of service, the issues of there's comparatively more consumption of energy if you do not have adequate charging stations or substations compared to consumption of fuel, and also terrain and gradient of the land also affects consumption a lot. And then, of course, there's overall lack of knowledge on e-mobility. For the business models, this was a surprise for all of us. 72% of the users here, they either own their bikes or are working towards owning their bikes. So technically, we had about 28% of users that would be able to take up what we had actually come into the market with, which was a leasing model, not an ownership model. And then we had to do a pricing model that is sensitive to the different users that I talked about in the different categories of riders. Next slide. All right, so what did we do? So we did a rental model. This is what we are able to do because of the different circumstances that we're with. Of course, we realized the 70% shows that there's a huge market for pay-go or for direct sales. But for EVs, as a company, we had a couple of principles that you had to adhere to. The issue of shared economy. Our target was a bottom of the pyramid kind of client. And EV is a very, very huge investment. So we decided to focus on the 28% that would be able to rent. And also because EV is still an iterating technology, there's still a very high risk potential. If you buy a bike today and the battery fails tomorrow, that's almost a 50,000 Kenya shilling investment that you need to make again. And also for us as an organization, we work with the circular economy principle, and we always want to know where the end product or the lithium-ion batteries end. So we prefer to maintain that risk within the organization and not transfer it to the community users. So we came up with 4 different pricing models based on the needs and behavior. One was leasing the battery and e-bike at a flat rate for either 5 or 7 days per week. And 5 or 7 days is basically depending on how the rider normally operates. They work in such a system where if I earn today, then I'm able to pay you. If I don't work today, then I'm not able to pay you. And if I worked yesterday, I don't want to spread this money to pay for 2 different days. So if I work 5 days, I still with 5 days payments. And also we worked with the bike rental only for 5 days a week, and then battery rental for every swap that you make. And this was targeted mostly at distributors who knew exactly what their routes are and able to plan for their energy consumption. For the first option, target the commercial riders. As I said, their riding patterns is not really known. It's not linear. It's not. You can't say it is circular because the client can take them anywhere, and they do not know what their energy needs per day would be. So more energy, the better for them. And also for corporates, we defined a pricing model to give them the bike and the battery rental per month, much lower cost because now the corporate will be able to charge the battery at their own facilities, so we do not incur additional cost at our station.
Yeah.
That is the summary, Herman. So very quickly on the learnings, we know we need to increase more ownership models versus use models because there's a very big market for ownership models. We need to really improve the technology for the batteries to increase the range, and also think about different business models to suit the different users, and also a lot of investment in charging infrastructure.
Someone is not muted.
Yeah, I think that was my last slide. The next one, probably my information. Yep, there. So if you need any information, please feel free to get in touch. Thanks, Herman.
Thank you very much, Stephen and Shori, for cutting it short. There's quite a lot of valuable information in there that we maybe we could jump into during the interactive session as well. At this point, I would like to switch over to Ghana. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Valerie, this is a presentation that I'm also really looking forward to. Issues around design and user-centered design, how you have been able to, increase the ownership around EVs in the market in Ghana. So over to you. I don't want to preempt a lot. I'm looking forward to your discussion.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Valerie Abena Konyo Larbi Gundu Saptana1, aka Mrs. Dagadi, and I'm the co-founder of Cargo Bikes Africa. And today I'm going to talk to you about our journey introducing and understanding the opportunity for e-bikes in Ghana. If you can bring up my slide, that's great. Brilliant. So Cargo Bikes Africa, we are being incubated under the Impact Hub Accra, and we are currently being supported through a project, the International Climate Initiative, through the Federal Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, and also in partnership with the Siemens Steifen Foundation. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so for me, my interest in e-mobility really started from my experience living and working in rural northern Ghana, where the majority of people were actually moving goods from A to B, as illustrated in the picture here. So our entrance to e-mobility was also really looking at how we could reduce the transport burden for women in particular by understanding if there was an entry point for e-mobility. Next slide. So we started, like you would normally do for human-centered design, with a problem statement. So how might we understand the needs, user needs, and designed context and e-mobility solution that would enhance the productivity of last-mile distribution in rural and urban Ghana? And we, if you could go to the next slide, the methodology we used was really human-centered design, user-centered design, and the focus of design thinking is really prioritizing developing solutions that people would actually use by understanding what they desire. We use 3 lenses to kind of underpin our research, our user-centered design research. So the first one was desirability, understanding what do people want. The second was looking at feasibility, what was actually technically possible within our market. And the third one was viability. So how much are people prepared to pay? What does the pricing structure look like? And the intersections between this was really around brand, functionality, and then the processes of introducing a new technology in the market. So if you can move to the next slide. We spent around 3 months traveling across Ghana. We spoke to more than 100, we spoke to hundreds of people, just trying to understand how they travel, how much they spend on transport, what do they want for an improved transport experience. And we developed a number of personas. If you can move on to the next slide. And just the 3 main personas we identified from a rural perspective, we met people like Samira. She was a shear collector and a farmer. She has the carrying responsibility of collecting everything from farm produce to firewood to water. She spends on average 3 hours a day carrying loads. She doesn't have a license. She was part of a community-based association, and typically if she was investing in a transport mode, it would have been a motor king. Her husband had a bike, but she didn't have access, but had a desire to, as and when needing one, to be able to lease. The second persona, if you can go to the next slide, is a more urban persona, and we can see across the continent now that delivery is now exploding. And so we had a persona of Daniel, sees delivery riding as a quick and easy way of generating income. He found motorbikes too expensive to buy outright, so he already had a natural work and pay arrangement for how he used his, got access to his motorbike. His major concern was rising fuel prices, and he was also part of an association, a riders association, and that's where he typically went to get information. And then the third persona we had was an even more urbanized retail shop owner of Amma, and especially since the pandemic, most of her customers were buying from her through Instagram. So she had a need to deliver goods as well as her own mobility needs. So she typically took Uber, was worried about the safety of riding motorbikes, had heard of e-mobility, and especially was really aware of rising fuel prices. She was also part of an association. She got information through church, and she regularly banked her money. So if you could go to the next slide, the thing that these 3 personas really had in common was that there's a huge opportunity for introducing e-mobility to people who currently don't own their own transport. All personas had a need to carry loads.
Stephanie, sorry. Yeah. Stephanie, sorry to come in here. I think there's something on top of your microphone. When you move, it's making sound. Also, you have 5 minutes to go just to alert you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, brilliant. Right. Can you hear me a bit better? Maybe it's my phone.
Yeah, it's your ventilator, I think. So
okay,
maybe.
that's
I don't know if you can.
Yes, so what the personas have in common, they currently do not own their own transport. They had a need to carry loads. They will all get information through trusted associations, and affordability and reliability was key. If you can go to the next slide. So really the next stage for us was looking at what is feasible. And so from the initial personas and the understanding, we actually revised our problem statement. So if you can go to the next slide. To actually look at, is there an opportunity to introduce a made in Ghana e-cargo bike that's affordable, aspirational, and easy to maintain? If you can go into the next slide. And again, yeah, so we actually took our bike on the road for a second round of discussions with consumers, for people to actually use, feel, ride the bikes. We went from the north all the way to the south, with the first prototype of a front-loading e-cargo bike. If you can move on. And consumers told us a number of things. Firstly, they told us they didn't actually like a front-loading cargo bike because it was difficult to navigate, but they did like that it could carry a lot of load. If we can move on to the next slide. The second prototype, we started with a backloading bike, and it was preferred, especially with a detachable cart. But in terms of entry point in the market, this was the space typically that we saw Motor Kings already filling. So we moved on to the third prototype. We realized from both an urban and a rural perspective, people were happy with just a converted e-bike that they could carry loads on their back. And what we started doing was sourcing domestic mountain bikes and doing our own e-conversion. But people said that they wanted better suspension and brakes to be key for it to be transferable across both urban and rural markets. So we settled on our fourth prototype. So if you can go to the next slide. Users said they wanted something that looked a bit cooler than a bike. So from an aspirational perspective, the adoption for e-bikes in the market is interesting because people were happy with an e-bike because the range anxiety is mitigated as per an e-scooter, because you can just ride if your battery gets depleted. But they wanted something that looked cooler, more aspirational than a bike because of how bikes are perceived as in the lower kind of income segment of the market. So this is the prototype we went to market with. If you can move to the next slide. So the final stage really for us was understanding viability. And there were 4 key questions that came up in the space when developing the model. How much does a bike cost? How do we charge the bikes? What happens if the bikes break? And do I need a license? So what we found was from most studies and most governments that are now developing out regulations and frameworks for e-mobility, they're actually ignoring the e-bike as an e-mobility solution on its own. They're typically either grouping us with e-scooters, which has different implications for insurance and for licensing. Going back to the original problem statement of a e-solution that could target women, particularly, when you have the issue of many women do not have licenses, this is another opportunity for e-bikes to be adopted in that space. How much does a bike cost? We have gone to market with a daily subscription fee where people are paying $5 a day to use our vehicles. How do we charge? Our minimum viable product that we went to market with was just making sure that every bike was leased with an extra battery so people could charge on the go. But as we're scaling up, we're realizing that we need to install some battery swap stations. So we are actually got into partnership with some of the delivery companies to establish swap and go charging stations at their delivery hubs. And what happens if the bike breaks? Leveraging a network of local bike repairers, and we're upskilling them so that they can also do basic maintenance on e-bikes. So if we move on, the final thing now that we've gone to market is really understanding how we continually iterate with information that we're getting from our users. And so you can go to the final slide. All our bikes actually have been fitted with trackers. If you click twice, and we have action cams on all our bikes. So we're now also leveraging the power of data to start to understand how people are using the bikes. What does road safety look like? What are the behaviors that riders are using with their e-bikes? And we're using this data across our bikes to understand long-term, hopefully, routing. It could also influence insurance for e-bikes, because we can now start to assess risk for delivery companies who are looking at crowding in our bikes into their value chain. We now also have information around things like waiting times, battery swap, energy usage. And I think this is really going to help us iterate to improve our business model, improve our pricing, and get the right product. And also influence the sector as a whole to drive adoption for e-bikes on the continent. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Looking forward to the discussion, and also just curious, I think you can mention this later if this is currently only in Ghana or looking at bringing it to other markets in the continent. But we can address that, I think, at a later point. And now we switch over to Uganda. Border work Uganda, and the main focus of the discussion here is on a specific component of the electric motorcycle, the batteries. And I think there's some question that also came up at the very beginning from the two initial presentation that I think maybe could be captured here. But overall, welcome, Janos. Looking forward to your insights. So as well, 10 minutes strictly. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman. Good day to everybody in your various time zones. Just waiting for the presentation to appear. I think let me start off by saying that about 5 years ago, we were in a place where almost nobody believed that electric bikes could work and could be an adequate replacement for the internal combustion engine bikes that are at the corner. And that's when we had our first prototypes on the road. And I can happy to say that 5 years down the line, the question is no longer whether it can work, but rather how access to finance can be gained. And that is pretty much the biggest worry that the individuals have. How do I get over the increased capital expenditure? Who can offer me the financing solution? Next slide, please. So who are we? We are actually four co-founders, an international team, and we came together initially to build an electric motorcycle for the region, and we quickly realized that the biggest challenge we had along the way was a battery that was apt to do the work. Next slide, please. So what did we decide to do? We decided to develop a battery standard locally. We did a lot of the tech development and everything else to allow us to share battery across multiple sectors. And the key sectors that we earn money in are energy and mobility. And our 48-volt battery is a literal plug-and-play swap between those two solutions. I'll dive into the applications a little later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Again. So the first one we'll talk about today is the electric boda, the one that everybody is familiar with, the electric motorcycle, the two-wheeler that is most quickly being adopted in the region. We've put about 100 of these on the road, and we can say that we have gone through 2 iterations in an effort to really achieve a vehicle that is high quality enough for the market. Now, with high quality, I mean, can it be overloaded? Do the parts need to be replaced regularly? And at the same time, basically make sure that our battery is up to scratch. So next slide, please. We offer one automatic model on the left-hand side and a geared model on the right-hand side. We found that for areas like rural Western Kenya and for drivers that have overloading tendencies, gears are required at this stage with our vehicle. And this has proven to be quite an apt solution. Each of these motorcycles, just like the other applications, again, is run off the 48-volt battery. It's a smart battery, and it's once again offers around 120 kilometers on a charge. And that equates to 4.6 kilowatt hours in battery size for those who are interested. Next slide, please. The next application is an electric walking tractor. So it's similar to the motorcycle. We didn't want to reinvent it. We built the motorcycle off the back of an existing Bajaj platform. And here we're using the Chinese Changfa tractor platform. We're replacing a diesel combustion engine with electric motors and batteries. We can do around an acre of field work with about 8 kilowatt hours worth of battery power. Next slide, please. There should be 2 videos. One of them is that working for you? Whoever is, if not, we can also skip to the next slide. All right. Next solution is an electric outboard motor for the fishing boats that are on the lake. So this, similarly to the tractors, always paired with 2 of our batteries at least. They're just more energy intensive applications, pushing a boat through water or pulling a plow through a field. These ultimately do also offer much larger potential, therefore, though, for replacement of or shall I say, reduction of carbon gases, and offer a large opportunity for an improvement in the daily operational expenditures of the individuals operating these modes of transport. So in anticipation of the next slide, I'll just go ahead and say that, yes, okay, I think we're back. Yes, I'll go ahead and say that we basically focused all our energy on doing as much as we could in Uganda. The idea was, to develop solutions on the ground for the region. And let me say the most central piece of technology we've developed is a battery management system, and it sits within every one of our batteries. It is in its previous variant, a sort of a Bluetooth smart device, and in our current generation, basically it's an IoT device, so it communicates via SIM card and offers all the benefits of tracking and planning and remote switching, which ultimately also is in preparation for asset-locked lending, so that the financing solution that is so dearly required in the region can be availed. Next slide, please. So a few more details there. You can see actually each of these batteries is equipped with such a printed circuit board. We can move on to the next slide. Yes. So what does this hardware do? Essentially, it means that we are able, to pin each and every battery we produce on a map. It means we're able to understand all its technical values. We're able to send it updates. We're able to do predictive maintenance, and we're able to offer people a software as a service solution that helps them organize their fleets and basically anything else that they're trying to do on a battery-powered basis. In the long run, this should definitely also be an opportunity to generate data-driven CO2 certification in an effort, to add further value to our region's economy. Next slide, please. Everything we do is with circular economy in mind. So we've already mentioned that in order to make the asset go as far as possible, we're sharing it between multiple applications. We also make sure that the battery has multiple lifetimes. Its key lifetime is, of course, in something as heavy, energy intensive as the mobility sector. But when a battery is depleted a couple of years down the line due to heavy usage, it actually has still 80% of its capacity or more retained. And this allows us basically to reuse the battery in a secondary application like stationary storage. Our 48-volt standard basically makes that transition seamless. That would be its second lifetime. And its third lifetime, we would have to take apart the battery and harvest its individual cells that it consists of, and these basically can in turn be tested, sorted, and used in applications like power banks and torches that are even less energy intensive before cells are finally aggregated and sent for chemical recycling. Next slide, please. And in chemical recycling, actually, we have managed, or not we, but partners and generally recyclers around the world have managed to push about 90% material efficiency on recycling, which is quite impressive. So that is the final lifetime. And interestingly, the raw materials that come out of recycling are heavily contested inputs for new battery cell production because they're actually quite refined and they're easier to work with for cell manufacturers. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so final minute, I think.
Yes. Yes. I think we can gloss over these two next ones. There are challenges and there are opportunities. If you could just jump ahead. Yes, one more, please. We believe that the biggest opportunity that we have here locally is, to get our people invested into a future-oriented sector and make sure that we have the skills in the region to sustain ourselves and to add as much value as we can, if not have the entire value chain based in Eastern Africa. And to do that, next slide, please, we feel that the biggest effort needs to be put into training and talent development. Next slide. And, that extends beyond ourselves, but also needs to be collaborative. We're multiple players in the sector, all trying to achieve the same thing, the transition to renewable energies, particularly in the transportation sector. Next slide. Yes, and at the end of the day, the way to do that is, of course, through people. So I'd like to thank everybody for their attention and look forward to the discussion later on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Janos. This was very, very insightful overall. And seeing the different battery applications, really interesting. So right now, I will first of all like to ask my colleague Regina to put in a link in the chat. Then I can explain. Great, thank you very much. So for those of us who are joining, just click on that link. It will redirect you to a whiteboard where there are a couple of issues that we will be interested in you answering. So you can just click on the plus sign, and then you can answer each specific question separately. So while that is going on, and because we were running short of time, I would like to combine these two exercises. So the few questions that came up to our panelists, I would like to jump into that, beginning with the first question. I had a question to you, Gilian, at the very beginning. On the accelerated case, maybe you could highlight something there right now, as we also look to direct them. So just a minute to answer that, and then we jump on to the next question.
Sure. So the accelerated case I showed really does presume some form of government intervention. I think, as I mentioned, not just letting market forces take their role. And when we say government intervention, there's a whole range of things that governments around the world are doing, everything from setting like a firm target on zero emissions vehicles being on the road by a certain time, but also softer things, right? Free parking for electric vehicles, import incentives or tax incentives for purchases of electric vehicles, or for charging infrastructure, things like that. Or even public procurement, for example, of electric vehicles. I think there was also a question about, public vehicles, things like buses, for example. So I think there's a range of sort of these hard targets all the way to sort of soft benefits that governments are putting in place across the world that actually then stimulate EV adoption. So that's really the difference between the base and the accelerated case that I showed, is that government intervention actually kicking in.
Okay, great. Question to Omondi. I think you had a focus on rural environments for your current product. Would you say your experience would apply to an urban environment as well? And or what are the different pointers you think an urban environment will need to focus on compared to a rural environment?
I think there could be learnings that you could transfer to urban environment, but critically, the income level in the rural environment is much lower than that in the urban environment. We have a much more robust middle class in the urban environment. They're more accustomed to using apps on phones and things like that. So this is something that somebody who could be able to integrate in a business model for even in an urban environment, which is not possible in the rural environment. And then for rural environment, we rely a lot on two-wheelers for last and first miles of transport. This is not so the case for places like Nairobi, where Matatu Terminal is very close to a state. You don't need to rely on a two-wheeler. So there could be use cases for commuter transport in urban environment, and more of commercial use cases in a rural environment. So a bit of subtle differences here and there, but basically the learnings, especially on energy consumption and things like that, you're able to transfer from one region to another.
Okay, thank you. To Valerie, so I had a question I had asked about whether currently the focus is strictly in Ghana, or you're looking at the broader market in the continent as well. There's another question here to you as well. Do you also sell the e-cargo bikes, or you only have them on this subscription model?
Yeah, so in terms of our aspirations, we're actually trying to pilot in 5 different countries over the next 12 months. So we're in the process of setting up a pilot in Côte d'Ivoire as well. Fortunately, we've established a partnership initially with a delivery company that already has a presence. So our entry point is just to crowd into their value chain and see how it's used in different markets. We currently just lease. But we do have a buy, lease, earn model for people who are already investors in the kind of micro-mobility space to have a really easy opportunity to invest in either the bikes for us to find people to lease it to, or to invest in the setup of a charging station as a franchise. Yeah, so I think that's where we are.
And did you mention the maximum speed of the bike, the one that is currently on iteration?
Yeah, so we've actually limited the maximum speed to be 30 kilometers per hour, just so that from a safety perspective, we can also manage that, but they can go faster. And just so we're now trying to understand for the utility of the bikes that we've introduced, where are the zones and areas that they're actually crossing, so we can get a sense of what are the speeds for the different roads, and even from a routing perspective, if they're using A roads, what is the average speed they need to even enter the road. But for now, we've kind of routed based on zones and tried to limit the speed.
Okay, great. There is a question to Janos here. Do you face any temperature issues when you operate in hot weather conditions?
So we do not. At present, we haven't tested in the Sahara though, so potentially there are places on this continent where our solutions would suffer under heating, but I know motors and batteries have been designed and specified to be cooled passively, so by the air that surrounds them. And we basically have temperature probes inside all of our equipment, and we're happy to say basically that we're able to keep all our equipment within operating temperature.
Okay, out of curiosity, maybe you mentioned this in your presentation, Janos, but are you already supplying batteries to other startups or companies outside? I think you mentioned you operate the batteries on your own bikes. Do you also supply outside, or it's purely at the moment limited to?
No, actually, our major work is to sell batteries. It's just applications were necessary to prove that the batteries are capable. So some of our clients have been in this call or presented with us. So yes, we do supply to other companies. We supply batteries cross-border. We're primarily focused on serving the East African region at this point. Everything else may not yet make sense logistically in terms of our company size.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there are 2 questions here that just came in, and there are quite a lot of questions in the chat. I'm sorry. I can't address all of them, but there are 2 that have just come in. I think one was partly addressed by Gilian, but has the experience been that e-boda requires less maintenance than ICE? Maybe Gilian, you might say something on that. And then there's another question on skills. So anyone can jump in after Gilian here. Is it straightforward to upskill existing mechanics, or is it a very different skill set? I think Omondi did some work on this as well. I will repost it in the chat just so you can see. But Gilian, over to you, because I think the first one you touched on it.
Sure, and of course, I think the other speakers will have views on this too, but generally speaking, electric vehicles in general have fewer moving parts because of the nature of the powertrain. So actually do require low maintenance. And that's, I can't speak for the e-boda in particular, but that was our experience, although they haven't been on the road as long. But certainly when you look at electric vehicle cars, which have been on the road for many, many years, it's proven that actually they do require lower maintenance, fewer moving parts, fewer things to break, right? But to your skills question, the one thing to note is certainly for larger electric vehicle classes, there is an electrocution risk when you are fixing them, which is not the case for an ICE vehicle. So you tend to need higher safety standards for mechanics. I don't know what the case is with the electric bodas. I'd actually be curious to hear from the other speakers, but certainly for larger vehicles, the battery is large enough to actually pose a safety hazard to the mechanic. So we do find that upskilling and having stronger safety standards is very important for mechanics for electric vehicles compared to ICE vehicles.
Yeah, I think Valerie, you can come in now.
Yeah, I think for us, this is why one of our entry points was e-bikes, because actually the ability to upskill people is relatively simple. And I think one of the other questions just speaking to you around the adoption from a gender perspective, kind of the talent in the e-bike space is somewhere that I think is also relatively open as a point to also crowd in women as kind of producers and services in the ecosystem, because it's you don't need much capital to actually enter that space, and you don't need that much training. I think still on the kind of, there was a question on gender issue limitations as well. I think this is why we've also really tried to push use versus ownership. I think when we did the research, one of the women in Ghana told us that she doesn't drive the family car, but she shares the car loan. And so this is one of the things around ownership is you transfer the burden to the family, but the utility is typically with the man. And we feel that if there isn't like a meaningful approach around sharing, either in individual EVs or through the utility of electric vehicles in public transport, we're actually going to push out women in this kind of future industry. So I think just one of the other final reasons why there's a challenge in this space is also around capital. The capital is very, it's already risk averse because it's high, you need a lot of CapEx. But if there is more flexible capital to actually make sure that we can crowd in this diversity in terms of our models, without that, we won't see the adoption in terms of e-mobility, including women.
Yeah, Omondi.
So the question on skills, it depends really on what level you want this bike to be serviced or developed. If the bike has already been developed and just need to service it, then it's pretty easy to upscale, because most of the controllers and batteries are made to be service free, to say, so you don't need to go into the controller. So for startups who are doing lots of maintenance of the e-bikes, you just need a mix of a technician with the mechanical knowledge and a technician with the electrical knowledge, and they can work in tandem to keep the bikes on the road. For developers like Janos, you need somebody with a degree, maybe in mechatronics, something like that. So it's not easy to upscale maybe from a community mechanic to actually develop a battery system and work on all that. But for the maintenance level only, which is what I think most of the mechanics will be doing, you just need a mix of electrical and mechanical, and probably do a very basic course on how the electronic system works, so they're able to get a better understanding of what needs to be done. So I'd say yes, it's easy to upscale if you just want to do servicing.
Yeah, thank you. Janos, before you come in here, I think you also mentioned something around this in your very final slide around, I think, curricula or technical expertise development. I'm so curious also because I think you have a very niche, focused approach. What do you also have to say around this issue of upskilling or necessary, just building skills from zero around, Yeah.
Yes, I can definitely comment that Omondi has made a good point already in terms of the maintenance and routine interaction with these products. The step between electrical and ICE in these light vehicle classes, 2- and 3-wheeler, is not that big. So it's a very, very achievable to train and upskill individuals. And yes, it has proven to be value adding for them, because in any electrical system, the most valuable skill is diagnosing a problem. And if you can sort of follow wires, then as a mechanic in Uganda, at least, you immediately get to earn more per day than somebody who doesn't. So there's some relevant skills to be had that can be easily taught. In terms of minimizing the work that needs to be done for people to get used to working with things, we chose the approach to go with the conventional platform that's already known. So there isn't a mechanic that doesn't know how to service a Bajaj or how to service one of those tractors that I showed you, or even fix a hole in a boat, for example. But if it comes to the very technical things in terms of system design and actually opening any of the electrical components that doesn't really require service, that is now a more involved job, and where people really would have needed to go through a multi-stage curriculum before they could be deemed fit to work on the systems. On the point that Gillian made, though, systems that are sort of in the 48-volt regions we operate in do not pose any electrocution risk. I just wanted to clarify that. The electrocution risk basically is for the higher voltage classes that hopefully will also find their way into the East African community soon. But I do believe we'll be asking the lower voltage questions first in our region, as the adoption of 2 and 3 is likely to be quicker.
Yes, thank you. So we have 4 minutes, 4 minutes to go, and I see a hand. I would like to open it up at least to the participants joining us. I see a hand from Guy Yunda. So Guy, if you have an input, please keep it very, very straightforward. If it's a comment, please very straightforward. If it's a question also, please very straightforward. Guy Yunda, see your hand up. Did you have something to share? Okay, we really don't have time to wait, unfortunately. So I would like to ask if we can go back to the board once more.
Oui, bonjour à tous, j'espère que vous m'écoutez. Vous m'écoutez quand même? Vous m'écoutez, je vous en prie.
Yeah, unfortunately the session is in English, Guy, so we won't be able to open it up for you right now. Sorry about that. So we have a few input on the board right now. So all the participants, this is an opportunity in case you have something to say, you can join in and say something there. But there was an overall question that I wanted to...
Oui, je vous en prie.
Yes, please, yeah, Guy, you can write your question, keyboard question on the chat function. Sorry. Yeah, we would like to go to the board just to see what the participants also joining had to say. But in the meantime, while we do that, there was a question here from Dennis that I think we could be answering at the moment. But also for the other panelists, if you see a question that you want to respond to, please feel free to also jump in the chat because we don't have more time. Who would want to take this question? What is the biggest hindrance to scaling up absorption of e-mobility products? I think this is directed to the specific companies present. What is the biggest hindrance to scaling up absorption of e-mobility products so far in your areas? I think this is directed to Janos and
I would say finance. If it needs to be one word, it's finance. It's access to finance to purchase a solution that is more capital intensive but less expensive to operate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think for me it would be the same. Finance to actually take you through the gates of development, and then asset finance to kind of bridge alternative ownership models.
Yeah, maybe Mondi and Gillian, you had something?
For me, I would say it's already finance, yes, but really think about charging infrastructure. If you're able to get that right, we saw the growth of ICE has really been spurred because of the single petrol tanks that you have all around. So if you can get charging infrastructure right, we're going to see a lot of EVs being adopted in the community.
Yeah. Okay. Gillian, did you have something?
I mean, I think cost is still a question, right? I mean, cost definitely, and the second really being what we call range anxiety, right? When we did a survey of 1,000 vehicle owners in Africa, we actually found 90% of them knew about electric vehicles. So awareness actually doesn't seem to be an issue. It seemed to be much more concerns about range anxiety and then the cost of adoption, which, by the way, is consistent globally as well.
Thank you very much. So thank you to our panelists. This was a really great exchange. Key lessons from all over Ghana, quite interesting. We're looking forward to these products being available in Kenyan market. Janos, really great insights on what you're doing in Uganda with the batteries. Omondi, thank you very much for the insights on experiences in Western Kenya. And Gillian, thank you for the overview of the market so far. So some of this presentation will be shared later on. Also, please feel free to, the board will be left open for a few minutes. So feel free to jump in and add whatever insights you have on the 3 issues we are raising there. Otherwise, we really appreciate you for joining us, and for all of you, we look forward to further engagements on this issue. There's a next session just coming in. Please, you can jump into the online platform to follow on the rest of the sessions. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Everyone, bye.